This chapter is all about making life easier. We're going to configure some important presets and explore using remote control devices. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a solid understanding of how to use track presets, VST presets, workspaces, project templates, and remotes. Presets are the key to working quickly. They can also help you recover from a crash or other system issues. Now, we're all familiar with the concept of presets. Most of the time, we start with a factory preset on our virtual instruments, which prevents reprogramming Hellion Sonic from scratch each time. So what we need to do is extend this concept to many other areas in Cubase. Let's start by looking at the track presets from Steinberg. Open Media Bay, set the location to All Media, and clear any filters. Now select the Media Type Track Presets. The Media Type column shows more detail. Of course, we now have in Cubase 7 a whole host of strip presets from producer Alan Morgan to choose from. And if you scroll down, you can see dozens of other audio track presets. Steinberg has used some of the best engineers in the world, including Mr. Morgan, to help design these, and using them is a great way to learn things like EQ technique or compressor setup. Let's look at a bass drum preset and see what's in there. Find one you want and double-click it. Cubase creates an audio track with all of the variables configured. Open the editor to see what's going on. Now, after we make some adjustments, we can save it as our own track preset. Right-click on the track and select Save Track Preset. Choose your name carefully so that you can find it again quickly. Now, if you scroll down further in the results list, you'll see more types of track presets. Here are presets for some virtual instruments. These will load the track settings and the instruments all at once. We have some MIDI presets here too. And look at this. There are several multi-track presets here for choirs and drum kits. If we double-click on one of these, Cubase creates all the audio tracks which are already named and configured. To save our own multi-track presets, select the tracks that you want as a group, then right-click and select Save Track Presets. The most important type of presets are probably the VST connections. This is easy to overlook because we tend to think of VST connections as something that we do once and forget about. But your connections can get scrambled by software updates, firmware issues, or even changes to the operating system. Having your connection configuration stored is a lifesaver. Start at the Inputs tab. Make sure your buses are all configured to your basic setup. Now click the plus sign next to the Presets window. And save it. That's it. Now repeat the process for each of the 6 tabs. And I recommend using the same name for each tab. That way you can recover quickly. One note, and this applies to any preset or templates that you create. Media Bay is case sensitive. So if I want to update my VST template, I need to resave it with the exact same name and select Overwrite. Otherwise, pretty soon you'll have a bunch of slightly different versions. Cubase also lets you save desktop configurations as workspaces, and they're essentially a preset for your windows. Each workspace has an ID number shown at the top of the window menu. And if there's a dot after the number, the workspace is locked. This doesn't freeze the window position, it just prevents you from saving over that workspace. To create a new workspace, open the Workspace submenu, select New Workspace, enter a name for the workspace, and click OK. Now the workspace will appear on the submenu. To activate another workspace, simply select it from the list. You can also access up to 9 workspaces using key commands. This is similar in concept to the new Mixers functionality, allowing you to store up to 4 rack configurations and switch between them quickly. Select Organize from the submenu for even more options, which are covered in detail in the operations manual. Workspaces are saved globally, so a workspace that you create in this project will be available to all your projects. But for that reason, they do not save project-specific windows like plugins. Now that we have the pieces in place, let's save all of this as a project template. The Project Assistant already has templates based on musical style, but you can use templates to reconfigure your studio quickly for specific clients too. And remember that your project template will include content, VST connections, and workspaces. Select Save as Template. If you open the Attribute Inspector in the dialog box, you can tag your template with a summary and a category. Remotes and control surfaces can be tremendous time savers. A control surface like the CC121 is the ultimate collection of key commands. And a remote control can help the solo artist save a lot of time walking between the booth and the computer. Remotes can use MIDI, infrared, or Bluetooth. First, we'll look at how to configure a hardware remote like the Steinberg CC121 controller. Since the CC121 uses MIDI information, our first step is to help Cubase separate the MIDI coming from it and the MIDI coming from our keyboard. Otherwise, we'll end up with CC121 data on our piano track. Open the Device Setup dialog. Select MIDI port setup in the list to the left. Check the table to the right and locate the MIDI input connected to the remote controller. Deactivate the checkbox in the In All MIDI Inputs for that input. The column should read Inactive. Click OK to close the Device Setup dialog. This just put the CC121 in its own group so that it won't be confused with an instrument. Remotes are configured in the Device Setup window. Open the Devices and Device Setup selection. Then select Remote Devices. And use the plus sign to open a pop-up if you don't see your device. Select your control device from the list. Select the correct MIDI input and click OK. If the link between Cubase and the remote device is temporarily interrupted, you can re-establish communications by selecting the remote in the Devices window and clicking Reset. If your remote control device is not on the list, you can configure a generic remote to accommodate it. The generic remote control panel allows you to select a Cubase function in the top half of the screen and assign it to an incoming MIDI message from the controller in the bottom half. The easiest way to do this is with the MIDI Learn function. Connect your remote, select what you want it to control in the top half, click MIDI Learn, and move the corresponding control on your remote. Then repeat this process until all the faders, knobs, and buttons on your controller are mapped. And just a note, you may be able to find and import a configuration for your device on the internet, and then use the Import button to load it. Apple computers come with a very small TV-style remote, which you can use to control Cubase, but you need a line of sight for the infrared to work. To configure your Apple remote, open the Devices menu and select Apple Remote Control. The Setup dialog shows all the Apple Remote's functions, and each one has a drop-down. Use the drop-downs to map the Cubase functions. Now, two things to keep in mind when using the Apple remote. One, consider labeling it, or at least creating a diagram until you get familiar with it. And two, the Apple remote will control whatever application is in focus on the computer. So if you flip over to iTunes mid-session, the remote will then control iTunes. If you want to keep the Apple remote locked to Cubase at all times, uncheck the option to Disable when application is not in front. And finally, let's take a look at the iPhone app Cubase IC. Cubase IC is a free download available from the iTunes App Store. And Cubase IC gives you more functionality than the Apple remote. It's more portable than a hardware controller and allows you to work without the need for a line of sight. This is the user interface for Cubase IC, which gives you a time display, scrollable position, volume control, full transport controls, and control of the metronome. Now let's move on to the next chapter, where we'll look at working with video and the score editor.